Alright, now that we've normalized our audio, let's turn our attention to the quality of the video. Just like there are times where you will want to manipulate the audio to get a more standardized volume, as we did in this case, there are also going to be times when you're going to want to manipulate the video as well. Often, this comes into play when you're trying to do what's called color correction. Now, this can occur when you're recording two different perspectives of a student. In this case, in a recital setting, as we already looked at earlier, you may want to have two different perspectives of your student playing with, say, an overhead and a side shot, as we already looked at earlier. One problem that can arise when recording two different shots from two different cameras is that the color quality of each camera may be slightly different. For example, your white balance may not be synced up with both of your cameras. So you may end up having one shot looking warmer than the other one or cooler. Now, this can be distracting when you're switching between each perspective. It's going to result in a lack of fluidity, and it's going to be noticeable that you're using two different cameras. Now, while there may be some times where you want that effect, sometimes I've actually seen this effect used in documentaries or something where they're switching to a side shot from the main camera, and they actually want it to look different, as if they're filming the actual filming. And so in that case, you may want that to actually be accentuated. But in a recital setting like this, you're going to probably want it to be as seamless and fluid as possible. Now, it's important to note it's not going to be a big deal in between each student, because each student is going to be recording in their own home with their own piano, with their own background, with their own lighting. So in that case, it's going to be expected that there's going to be a difference in lighting between each student playing. But it does become more noticeable or more distracting when you've got two shots of the same student that aren't syncing up with the same lighting or coloring, etc. So we can do some color correction or manipulation of the color to get a more uniform effect. Another reason you might want to apply color correction or manipulate the color in your video is when you have a video submitted by a student that was shot in poor lighting conditions. So maybe the student is underlit, there's a lot of shadows, not a lot of contrast. They might be overlit or have backlighting behind them that creates too much shadow on them or something of that nature. In any of these cases, you do have some leeway to play with the coloring a bit, and I'm going to show you how you can do some color correction. I don't find that I have to do this a whole lot, especially if you give the students adequate instructions on what to do with lighting and that, but occasionally it will come into play. I actually have a couple of cameras that I use that are very different quality cameras in terms of how they shoot and capture color, and so it's definitely something I need to use in those instances if I want my performance to look seamless. So in this video, if we go back up to the media bin and we look through these, most of these are well lit. These students have recorded many recitals with us, and so they have an idea of what they need to do to have good lighting. So most of these are okay. But let's go back to this student here. Now, this student performed a piece from The Little Mermaid. And so she wanted to make it feel like we were under the sea as she was playing. So she purposely added some effects and specialized lighting to give it that ambiance. If you notice, she's got this accent lighting around her room. She's got the lights turned down. She's either got some blue lighting in the room or she's added a blue filter to kind of make it feel like we're under the ocean. She even has her TV playing some ocean scenes in the background. So she really went to a lot of effort to make this look like she's under the ocean. So even though the lighting isn't as bright as you would normally want it to be for a recital, for the special effects that she's going for, this worked perfectly. And so we just used it as is. But let's say that she didn't mean to add this effect, that she just happened to shoot in low lighting, didn't realize that it had kind of a darkening effect upon her in particular. We can see that her face, for example, is quite shadowed with the lighting that she's using. Again, it worked for this particular performance, but let's say we wanted to lighten up her features a little bit to add some contrast so that we can see her better. So we can come over here and we will go to Visual Effects. Again, if you don't see it here, you can go to More, and it may be over in here if you haven't used Visual Effects yet or haven't used it recently. But mine's here, so we'll go ahead and hit Visual Effects. And then there's a whole bunch of visual effects that you can add. And we're not going to go through all of these, but I will show you a couple of ones that I use for color correction. So the two we're going to look at are color adjustment and color LUT. LUT being an acronym for lookup table. So I'm going to show you how these both work. So let's start with the color LUT. So again, all we have to do is click on this effect and pull it down to the clip that we want to add to it. Again, it will show you that the visual effect was added. And now, if we go to the triangle, like we have before for audio, we have the audio compression that we added earlier, but we now also have the color LUT. If we click on the color LUT, it'll turn yellow, and then back up here in the inspector window, we can see the options we have to manipulate this particular effect. Now what a color LUT is basically like a filter that you can add to change the color qualities of a picture or a video. So in the old days, they had lenses that you would put on the actual cameras to create some of these filter effects. But of course, nowadays with everything digital, we can apply these filters digitally, and that's what we're doing here. So I can come up here. This is the on-off button for this effect. It's currently on. If I turn this off, and we look over here at the image, you'll see that something has happened. You can see there's a change that's taking place. This is the original picture. If we turn the color LUT back on, you can see the contrast changes. It becomes a little bit more dark and pronounced. Now this is the default LUT that comes with Camtasia 2022. It's called Enhanced Contrast, and just as we saw, it did enhance the contrast. Now you can download your own set of LUTs. There are websites that you can go out and get those from, and many of them are free. So you can type in free camera LUT, L-U-T, and several sites will come up. And then you can download those, and then you can go into Camtasia, and I've downloaded a bunch here, but when you come in here first, you're just going to have this one default enhanced contrast. But right below it will be this import LUT file. You can click on that, and if you've downloaded the LUT files from a trusted website and you've noted where you've saved those, then you can hit import LUT and then choose the folder they're in. In this case, I've got some from Shutterstock because it's a well-known company for stock photography and video. And I downloaded it. It came in this folder, Shutterstock free LUTs, and then here they all are. And I selected all of these and then I hit open, and that uploaded them to Camtasia. So now I have them in here. So you can go through once you get some LUTs downloaded, and you can just kind of see what they do as you scroll over them. That's the cool thing about this, is as you scroll over each one of these, it will show you what the LUT effect is. I'm going to go back up to the original LUT that comes with Camtasia and use that one for now so that you can see what the effect does, since this is an effect that you will have if you have Camtasia 2022. So with that on, like I said, we saw the change in the contrast. But as you can tell, if anything, it actually darkened her face to where it's almost harder to see her face as it is. Now that doesn't mean we won't want to use it. It just means we may need to add another component and then work with the two to find an optimal contrast. So that's where this second feature comes in, color adjustment. And we're now going to pull that down and add that as well. So we now have it here above the color LUT. We've got the color adjustment. Now when we put this in, immediately it's going to turn black and white because that's the default settings when you put it on. But you can easily change that. So as we come back over here to the inspector window, again we have several slider toggles that we can adjust to get the desired effect. So the first thing I want to do is turn down the contrast. It's all the way up and this is looking pretty dark. So let's pull this down. And I can see a lot of her facial features more clearly now. If I go too much further, those features are going to get washed out. So I'm going to come somewhere in about here and leave that there. But it still feels too bright. There's better contrast, but it still feels too bright. So I'm going to lower the brightness as well. Okay, and maybe somewhere around there. Then finally, I'm going to go to the saturation slider, and this is going to add the color back in. And we can pull that up until we have the color where we want. Now, you can overdo it with some of these. If we take this all the way up, you can see that's really saturated and is looking pretty unnatural. So you'll want to just play around with these until you find a contrast that looks good. Finally, there's this range area, and this will highlight or diminish certain color properties within the video that you're working on. So this will filter gray shadows, this will filter red shadows, this will filter green shadows, this will filter blue shadows, this will focus on the midtones in the different colors, and then this will focus on the highlights in the video. And so you can again go through these and find one that you feel works best and stick with that. I like this gray shadows because it lowers this ambient light and makes it less distracting to focus on the actual student. Now that we've got both of these effects on, we can close this and then just click on the clip, and we will be able to see both of them over here in the inspector. And now if we need to make a few tweaks here, we can. Okay, so I've played around with these a little bit, and I'm feeling this is pretty good. You can see that her face is lighter, it's not quite as dark, and it also has some additional warmer color to it. Before it was quite dark and shadowed. So I'm liking that. Now, one thing is the background is also lighted up more, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing. You don't want it too distracting either. But I think overall there's a pretty good balance here between getting some additional lighting and color on her face without washing out the background too much. Okay, let's go down and scrub through this and see how it looks from all angles. So we'll start it back here. And from this angle, her face is a lot better lit. Let's go back and turn off both of these effects so that we can see what they are actually doing. So here's the color adjustment turned off. Again, her face is noticeably darker. And then here's without the color LUT. And again, it looks pretty good. But if you wanted to bring out more of her facial features, having these on does that. But it also does create a fairly washed out background. So you kind of have to decide what your preference is and what's most important. Again, this was specifically meant to be shot the way she did. So us altering it this way is not necessarily better. But this will definitely be more valuable in those instances where you simply have poor lighting. But scrubbing through this, it looks pretty good. I mean, there is one thing with the TV, there's some color distortion happening around it. And we can see some distortion here a lot more clearly as it moves through. Again, that might give it a magical look. That might actually be something that's desirable. That's certainly something that I wasn't going for, but it actually kind of adds to the magic of the piece. So sometimes as you're playing around with some of these effects, you may encounter something you never intended to encounter, but you find out it works better than what you were originally trying to do. So that can be half the fun of putting these recitals together, is as you're playing around with different effects, you find things that you can do or find ways to do things even better. And again, if you're not sure that you want to keep it this way, you can always turn these off, but have them saved in there just in case you want to go back. So that's one way to do some color correction or some color enhancement. And again, it's up to your preference or to your student's preference. So this is just something you'll want to play around with until you find something that works for you.